here. I think I know most of your faces. But I think one of the most exciting things, or what I love most about this job, is that I'm in it with the families. I have a almost 10-year-old and 8-year-old girl and boy. And it was funny, when this event was brought up, it was earlier this fall, and it was about that time my 9-year-old girl, we are in it in 3rd grade. We're getting to experience all the things in the 3rd grade. And so she came home and she was up one night with me, and she was like, Mom, I don't think I can do this anymore. Like, this is too much, and this is too much, and this is too much. And she was going through this long list of social and academics and sports and everything on her plate. And she was like, and she's all worked up. And she said, and you want to know the worst thing? I'm like, yes, tell me there's more. And she said, yes. Mom, I'm a kid. I'm like, right, you're just a kid. You're a kid that's juggling too much stuff. And you know what? I don't have any of the answers for you. But we go to places where we can find the answers. And it just makes me grateful for Peachtree Road that we have Emily Miles here on staff that connects us with One Lamb. And so we just thank you so much for putting on this event to partner with us as parents. We don't know what we're doing all the time, and just need extra hands and extra resources. So again, help yourself to anything in the back. Before we get started, I would love to pray for us, to pray for our evening, and then we will get started. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you that the sun, it rose, and that it is setting, and we are moving closer to spring, new beginnings. Thank you that you meet us where we are. You don't require us to be anywhere but where our 2 feet land, and that you have given us children, you have made us parents, and we don't always know why, and we don't always know what to do, but there are specific reasons why you chose our children for us, and there is something within us and something within our spouse that you know that we have that our children need. And so thank you for equipping us and for all that you do for our children and for us. It's in your son's precious name we pray. Amen. All right.
Thanks, Rebecca. I was able to introduce myself to some of you, and some of you already know me, but I'm Emily Miles. I work here at Peachtree Road as the Director of Mental Wellness. It's been such a joy working with Rebecca and the One Lamb team and getting this event for us this evening. I wanted to let you know that we regularly offer educational events like this and throughout the year. And so if you'd like to stay in touch with those offerings, please let me know, and I can make sure you are staying abreast to what's happening here at the church. But beyond our educational offerings, we do have ongoing resources. If for any reason you ever needed a referral for yourself or for your family or for your child to receive counseling or care, that's something that I can help assist with. You may be aware, or you may not know, that our church actually has 2 pastoral counselors that work in our grounds. Dr. Andrea DeWalt and Reverend Ron Greer have offices here at the church and see people every week. And beyond that, I have a lot of contacts in the area for other specialists if that's something that your family ever needs. And then our church just has a lot of supportive offerings. Rebecca does so many amazing things for the kids. And then we have a lot of great Sunday school classes for adults. We have Bible studies for adults. And we're actually going to be starting a mom's group here in a few weeks, and I'll make sure all of you know about that when that begins. I want to introduce our speaker for tonight, which is Marty Mumford. We are so lucky to have Marty. She comes from Anxiety Specialists of Atlanta. Did I get that right? You have a handout in front of you from their center. They're located in Dunwoody. It's really not far from here, and has a huge staff of professional counselors. Marty is a licensed professional counselor, and she specializes in helping those with issues related to anxiety. So anxiety disorders, phobias for children, for adolescents, and for adults. I know you use a few different methodologies. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is one of them, which is a really well-researched and great tool-based therapy to give you skills and action steps for moving forward. So Marty's going to speak this evening to us and give us some great information and also some tools for being parents. I've got a soon-to-be 2-year-old and another one on the way. Marty speaks to us as a mom with a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and so thank you for making time. I know these evening hours are so precious, all of us know that, and thank you all for being here as well. Marty.
Hello, hi everyone. Okay, we're gonna do this a little differently than I normally do. Sorry, I'm actually playing a fast one on you guys too. I normally do questions at the end, but we're a good sized group here where if you wanna ask a question or don't feel like you have to wait to the end, just hop in. But excited to be here tonight. Let's see if I can do this correctly. All right, oh, that's so small. I'm Marty, I am an LPC. I specialize in anxiety disorders and OCD, and I'm a mom. Can't read it, that's a joke. My kids never get anxious, they never have tantrums, which is false. They do, all the time. I was just telling them back there last night, my daughter had a huge meltdown. It's part of it, you're not doing it wrong. So, okay, so our goals tonight, we're gonna talk a little bit about how anxiety is formed, how it's also reinforced in a family system. And so that's why it's so great for me as a clinician to talk to you guys as parents, and why in my own practice, I personally don't do the whole like drop your kid off and come back in an hour and like, hope they get better, because anxiety is a family issue. We're also gonna look at your personal boundaries as a parent, which is a very foreign way to think about parenting. We are constantly being pushed directly or indirectly to put our children first, which means that we come second, right? And so it can often feel like a paradox, but a lot of times there's a whole metaphor here around put your oxygen mask on first that we're gonna wanna talk about. Again, redefining that supportive role of the parent. So how many of y'all have felt that tension between when do I help my child and pull them away from something that's bad or scary, and when do I push them to learn how to be more resilient and do something that's hard, right? That's really the crux of anxiety treatment. Of course, we want to talk about reducing anxious behaviors and changing our own behaviors as parents. I don't know if any of you guys have noticed, there's some really bad ways about parenting, which is that none of us actually control our children. We can't make them do anything as much as we'd love to. If any of you guys have ever been stuck in a school refusal situation, we see that a lot. Those parents are abundantly aware that they cannot force their child to do anything. Any picky eater parents, you're aware that you cannot force your child to do anything, right? And also help to then restore our child's autonomy. A lot of times anxious kids are really interwoven with their parents, and even when they're little, it can be beyond what's developmentally appropriate, which I know is a really late clinical term, but we really want them to feel confident and independent. Uh-oh. It doesn't want to click forward.
Point it back this way.
Oh.
Maybe.
I don't know what it wants to do. Can you just advance me? Does that work?
Push the right arrow.
Oh, I am.
Or page down.
I had a patient yesterday ask me what was one thing I could talk about for an hour without stopping, and this is it. So we can keep going, right? But if we can get it to keep going, that would be better. So we just frozen. Okay, in that case, I know we're here just looking at pre-K through elementary. How many of you guys just show of hands are on the like younger side of that, like second and below? Did y'all divide by room? Okay. And how many of y'all are like third and above? Okay. Okay, so like a mix. No offense. Can't help but notice that it looks like there's a lot of dad put downs tonight. So also part of the challenge, I know we talked about putting ourselves first. So glad that moms are getting a little laid out. something that I think is always important. Whenever I speak on this topic, we have to define what we're talking about. People use anxiety for all sorts of things. And there's lowercase anxiety, there's capital A anxiety. So what am I speaking about when I mention this today? So first of all, fear in the face of danger is normal. So in our practice, we talk a lot about the difference between scary safe and scary dangerous. I have a taxidermied snake in my office that I love to share this with, and it always scares parents. But we are not in the business of helping kids stop being scared of things that are dangerous. In fact, we want our children to be scared of things that are dangerous. Sometimes we wish our kids were more scared of things that are dangerous. My children running in the street. So anxiety is a perception of danger even when you're safe, right? So in the back of our brain, our lizard brain, we have a little teeny tiny thing called the amygdala, and anxiety is when that is triggered when we're otherwise safe. So treatment is helpful when that worry gets in the way of everyday functioning. And so what we call an anxiety disorder is when that amygdala is being triggered chronically at the wrong time. And so wrong time can mean two different things. It could be completely wrong emotion to the stimulus. I personally feel like a dog phobia falls into that, but you could argue that maybe not so much. But it can also be having that experience in a disproportionate amount, right? It may be appropriate to have some healthy fear about, say, driving a car, but not to the point where we shouldn't ever get in one. So what anxiety might sound like for your kids? Mom, can I come with you? Does anyone have any really clingy children? Yeah. My stomach hurts. A lot of physicality involved with anxiety. So we get those stomach aches that tend to peak very conveniently around sporting events or bedtime. Not going to school today. Not wanting to be involved in sports activities, academics, separation from mom and dad. Can I sleep in your room? Does anyone have any bedtime people? We do a lot of sleep stuff because anxiety affects sleep a lot, with adults as well, but certainly with kids. And that means you also have a very exhausted parent trying to parent that anxious child. Alexa's going to rain today. So that might not seem like something that feels like anxiety to you guys, but reassurance seeking is absolutely a part of anxiety. We see kids asking the same question again and again and again, and a lot of times what they're really asking is, can you give me certainty, right? The answer is, no, I cannot. It's no today. And are you sure nothing bad's gonna happen? Mom, are you sure you're gonna be the first one in line at pickup? Mom, are you sure that so-and-so's gonna be at the party? Mom, are you sure you'll be back by 5? No, we live in Atlanta. No one is sure they'll ever be back by 5, right? So, the standard anxiety cycle, and this is the same process that we would walk through with a patient who is 5 or 75. When someone gets triggered, they experience distress. And I always start with the word distress before I go to the word anxiety, because distress can look like a lot of different feelings. Boredom is a form of distress. And right now, adults and kids alike are highly triggered by the experience of boredom, right? So we have distress, we get that trigger, and we complete what we call a safety behavior or a compulsion. We'll get to that in just a second. That gives us temporary relief. We feel so good, we feel so calm. And we end up maintaining our symptoms again and again and again with that behavior. Now, that works really, really well when it comes to danger, right? Your brain is like a machine that's designed to learn. And so the algorithm of learned behavior, right? You jump out of the way of a bear, you're like, I should do that next time, that's a good idea. But that doesn't work so well when you're talking about the fact that an anxious person, they're gonna be triggered to that same response at an inappropriate time. So we have these T's, O's, and C's. So we call this the vocabulary of an anxiety specialist. And these are some of the first things that I try to get my patients to understand. Now, sometimes I use different words with little kids. Usually I say triggers, worries, and their safety tricks. That's what I call them. But our triggers, that's the thing that makes it happen, right? We have a little bee there. Our worry, what's gonna happen? And so here's the challenge with these two parts. Triggers, and you guys may have experienced this with your own kids. your kid is probably gonna try to treat their anxiety via triggers, right? If I don't go to baseball, I don't have to feel that thing anymore. If I sleep with mom and dad forever, I don't ever have to feel that thing anymore, right? The problem with triggers is that anxiety, if you think back to middle school science, anxiety is a guess. So it is going to take up the size of the shape you give it. And the way you make anxiety space bigger or smaller is how much it's allowed to breathe and expand and change the world around you. So what happens is when we start to treat the anxiety with triggers, your child's world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So some of you may have seen that in real life where something used to be fine, and then it stopped being so fine. Or one day it didn't feel so good, then the next time it didn't feel so good, right? And so their functionality starts to diminish. With our worries and obsessions, I use a lot of OCD type vocabulary here because anxiety and OCD follow the same exact cycle. There's some differences, some different things we kind of assess for, but a lot of the vocabulary really functions in the same way. But with worries, this is another place that people get stuck. And this is a really, really hard thing for parents too. It's a very hard thing for therapists also. But talking about our worries indefinitely can sometimes make them worse. Not because you're not right, not because the things you're saying aren't useful, but you're talking to the wrong part of the brain, right? So this front part, this is our prefrontal cortex. It's what makes your bed and does their homework and has a conversation, uses logic and reasoning. It is on purpose bypassed when we feel like we're in danger. Because it is way more important for you to get the heck out of Dodge when you see a bear than it is for you to be like, I don't know, that bear looks like he's kind of lazy. It should be fine, right? We're not there to rationalize in that moment, we're there to move. And so what happens is sometimes we can engage in over-rumination of a fear, and we really end up indulging that fear and giving it more room to breathe. So it doesn't mean we don't ever talk about our worries. It certainly doesn't mean you should start shutting down your kids when they're like, oh, I'm worried about something. But it's important to recognize that that's not a mechanism of change necessarily. How many of you have ever been in a situation, for example, where let's say your boss puts a meeting on your calendar at 4 o'clock on a Friday and it's Tuesday and you're worried. Nothing anyone is gonna say to you is gonna make that worry just disappear because the uncertainty is still there, right? And it's the same for your kids. So then we get to our safety behaviors or our compulsions. And this is where treatment from our perspective happens for anxiety disorders. It's a fancy way of saying we gotta learn how to do it scared first. Now, that's a very hard sell for kids. But that's how our brain learns. It learns to say, how can I engage in these first two without engaging in that behavior that's gonna trigger that whole cycle again. But pediatric anxiety has one extra step. So again, that was all the stuff for anyone of any age. But with pediatric anxiety, there is an extra step where a child looks to their caregiver. So we have what we call the accommodation cycle. So while, yes, there's safety behaviors, and that can be anything. It could be something that they do, it could be something that they avoid, all little tricks that they sort of play. An example of this playing out is a kid with separation anxiety who every single time mom is not within eyesight in the house says, Mom, are you there? And mom says, yeah, I'm in the kitchen. That's a safety behavior. The kid was no safer from that call and response behavior, but they felt better, right? So the accommodation, same thing, you have the distress related to anxiety, and this time the family accommodates. So maybe now mom starts, before she goes room to room, I'm going to the kitchen, I'm going to the garage, I'm going to the mailbox, and announcing where she is, right? Seems like, great, now they won't be worried, right? But they get a short-term reduction in distress. And we call that negative reinforcement, right? So we took away a bad feeling, we are making it more likely that that behavior occurs again. And so as the child continues to depend on parents for regulation, we end up maintaining their symptoms. So this is the part where parents are like, shoot, I do a lot of stuff for my kids? Like, what am I doing wrong? So, first of all parents accommodate. Good parents accommodate. I accommodate for my kids. 95 to 100% of parents of anxious children accommodate. So, that is based on research from a lot of the materials you're gonna see are from research done out of the Yale Child Institute for SPACE, which is Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions. And so a lot of the research on parents of anxious kids comes from that institute. Funny enough, in that same study, they asked kids, how many of you feel like your anxiety gets better when your parent accommodates? Almost every child said no, it didn't get better. Then they asked the kids, how many of you want your parents to stop accommodating? And like, none of them wanted that. They were all like, I know it makes it worse, and please don't stop, which is really funny. But uncertainty plus values equals anxiety. So, what is more important to anyone in this room than their kids? And what is more uncertain to anyone in this room than raising their kids, right? So, even though we're talking about our anxious kids, we can't take out the parent in this scenario. Because you guys are all going to be falling into the exact same cycle that we saw in the first loop, right? Where you're wanting to feel better and calmer because there's nothing worse than seeing your child upset. Truly, there's nothing worse. It doesn't matter what they're upset about. It's really distressing for you. And it's really uncertain feeling, right? And the bad news, and I'm in the same boat as you guys, like, we're not gonna figure out if we made the right choice until like 20 years from now. Like, we hope they turn out okay, but we don't know. So, the good news is, you are not the problem, but you are a really big part of the solution. And so since none of your children are here, we're not gonna do any sort of play interventions with them, or worry monster type stuff, or anything like that, although we do a lot of that at our clinic. We need to figure out, okay, how can we actually help parents with their anxious kids? So everything starts with unilateral communication. And this is very counterintuitive to a lot of the ways that modern parenting has moved towards, right? We talk a lot about using our words and collaborating, and there's a space for that, and it can be really important. But when it comes to parents helping their child learn to face their fears, unilateral communication looks like, this is me as your parent, and this is what I'm going to do. Remember, we don't control our kids. Okay, so what do I mean when I say accommodation? Let's talk more specifically. So the blanket definition that I give is anything that you do or don't do differently because your child is anxious. Okay, so we can look at participation, so answering questions, providing extra information, sleeping near your child. If anyone's doing the I have this whole thing where I put the door this way, and then I put the light this way, and I have to make the blankets this way, and the teddy bears this way, right? Performing checks, rituals, answering on behalf of your child, extra doctor's visits, extra temperature checks, extra reassurance, buying extra soap, so that a lot of our OCD families, or modification. Am I adjusting my route? I had a case just like this recently where a parent had driven with their child on the freeway in over 9 months because the kid didn't like it, right? And that wasn't, she's a wonderful mother, right? She's trying to go, okay, well, I don't know, I guess we can take back roads, what's the big deal, right? No one likes 25 anyway. Returning early, limiting the number of trips, avoiding changes to your routine, providing special meals, keeping windows closed. Those are all different things where parents are going, okay, I'm gonna change the way I normally do things to make my child feel more comfortable. And on the surface, we're like, yeah, of course we wanna make our kid comfortable. But we also wanna make them resilient, and that can be a really hard thing to balance, right? So questions to ask, is this something that I'm doing? This is where inevitably when I talk to parents about how they're accommodating, and you'll see there's a couple different documents there. One thing that I would recommend everyone do is take a bit of an audit. What are all the things I'm doing differently because my child is anxious? And I have parents just kind of brain dump it. Okay, well, in the mornings, I get all their stuff ready for them. Or she really gets panicked about her hair, so I make sure that we have enough time to do her hair and do her hair again I'm gonna do your hair a third time, right? I make sure that that we've always got one of their special snacks in case we get somewhere and they don't like to eat that food, right? There's all these different things that we might be doing. Is it developmentally appropriate to do this for my child? What's okay for those of you guys with pre-Kers might feel a little bit different when they're in 5th grade. Some of you guys that may have your kids sleeping in your bed, we see families that have 18, 19, 20-year-olds sometimes whose kids are still sleeping in their beds. To be fair, we are an anxiety specialty clinic, so we see a little bit more acute situations a lot of the time. But a lot of parents are like, they'll grow out of it, and our clinic's always like, not always! So you have to think about what's developmentally appropriate as well. What is my motivation? I ask parents that a lot too. Am I motivated to change this? Is this something that's dragging because either it's unequal for my kids, right? Other kid is starting to be frustrated because anxious kid gets to call the shots a lot because no one wants them to be upset, right? Or a parent is like, I'm exhausted, I'm at the end of my rope, there's nothing I can do that ever keeps it from happening, and I'm trying to keep all the plates spinning. Would I be doing this if my child was not anxious? That's the main question, really. Am I doing it differently for other children? Does this fit in with the culture of my family? And that's both the microculture of your family, what works for us, and the macro culture too. You know, in some cultures, it makes a lot more sense for your adult child to be living at home than maybe we let happen in the U.S. So being able to think about both of those things is important. Uh-oh, we're stuck again. I don't want to overclick it. I have a tendency to do that. It's all good.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
This is just kind of in general. What does anxiety look like? I mean, I know that's kind of strange.
Yeah.
Because I do have a child that is definitely anxious, but the other one, it's almost like she is too, but it's showing in an opposite way.
Yeah. It doesn't always look like fear,
Yeah.
right? And I feel like this is what gives therapists a really bad rap because we're always like, it depends.
Yeah, and there's not no funny answer for all.
Right? But also,
Maybe what are the different, like,
yeah, well,
general personality?
so certainly it can look like fear, but it can also look like irritability.
Yeah.
Right? That's quite common. And then on the flip side, I think people are often quick to go, I don't want to think that my child is just irritable, so like maybe they're anxious, right? So it can kind of go both ways. It can also look like rigidity, right? We see that a lot, where kids are really inflexible. And so again, it comes with that idea of needing certainty. And if that certainty isn't there, feeling like they're unable to cope, right? And so what the actual presentation of that looks like can be dramatically different across 50 different kids, can each have completely different presentations. And so that's why I always look for that cycle, right? I become triggered, I worry and obsess about something, I do something to try to escape that feeling, I feel better for a little while, and then it's back again, right? And I go through that again and again and again. And so if I have a family in my office who has one of those presentations, sometimes with we might have a kid that comes back from having psych ed testing, and they thought for sure that kid was on the spectrum, or they thought for sure that kid was ADHD, and the tester says, I think it's anxiety, and then they kind of come to us. And we might look at some of those things too, like where are they seeing, where is that symptom showing up that you're bothered by, and how could it potentially be impacted by anxiety, right? All of it comes back down to this idea of how do I expose you to the thing you're afraid of and make you more resilient in being able to handle it, right? And so even with those really rigid or really oppositional, irritable kids, you know, what I often tell parents is like, we don't need to solve the problem of why totally. What we need to do is build their resilience, right? And if we can boost their distress tolerance, won, right? Because their life gets better, they can handle more scenarios. And so from that perspective, it's like we don't have to have a blood test for anxiety to know, okay, there's low distress tolerance here. And that's part of why I use the word distress a lot before I use the word anxiety, because it oftentimes doesn't look like I'm scared, right?
Well, and like you talking about the frontal lobe kind of like disappearing during the, like that kind of triggered that question, because yeah, I'm like rethinking my child. So,
Yeah, well, and what oftentimes, so I think we'll get to it. Can't remember all the slides that I have here, but this idea too of coping skills. Parents are like, give me coping skills. And I always have really bad things where I'm like, the time you think you need coping skills, it's probably too late. And if you've ever had someone tell you to calm down when you're mad, you know it's too late, right? We were talking about the wellness, the role of wellness, right? That's where coping skills are really impactful. But when you're talking about an acute behavioral episode or an acute anxiety attack, don't tell someone to take a deep breath. Just don't do it, right? And so really it's about how do I learn to handle these situations on the front end. So what I tell parents a lot of times is like, once we've gotten to the tantrum stage or the yelling stage or the property damage stage, like we kind of need to say, how do we make this the best learning that we can with that brain algorithm for next time. And so what happens is a lot of parents are thinking, I have to calm down my child right now. And as long as we're coming from that perspective, a lot of times we miss the boat, right, on the thing we're actually having them learn. Because what we end up reinforcing is this idea of these feelings are bad, run away from them, instead of
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super helpful.
So, going back to that tug of war between when do I push my kid, when do I tell them I love them and it's okay, and all the like warm fuzzy good parts that we really like to do that part. We don't like to do the kind of, all right, tough up part of it. The way I like to break it down for parents is like we have to do both. So we have the validation. That's the like, this must be really hard for you. I can see what you're feeling, right? The sort of modern parenting, gentle parenting side of things. And then confidence. So what often happens is we do one or the other. So we say, I know you can do it, but we're like, but we'll try tomorrow, right? Or, but I'll pick you up early. And so what we end up doing is we don't really display confidence to our child the way we intended to, or the way we as like rational adults had it in our head. That's what we were saying, but it might not have been what we were doing. So when we take those two things and gotta put them together, I know this is challenging and you can do it. They're not mutually exclusive. And a lot of times we see parents kind of good cop, bad coping this part, where one parent is really good at being the validator and one parent is really good at pushing them. And it can be a real challenge because one, they're probably getting different results from their kid. They're probably getting triangulated away from their kid. And also, it's a real bummer for the bad cop because it can really damage their relationship with their kid too. And so I always tell parents, like, you've got to borrow from each other. You got to come in the middle because one of these things without the other, we call it protecting or demanding. So all validation, zero confidence is like a protective parent. And we hear them saying things like, she just falls apart, she can't do it. I just don't think it's ready, this is too much for them. We're having a space, we teach this space, supportive parenting of anxious childhood emotions in group format a lot. And we had a new cohort launch last week. And just yesterday, the parent was like, I just don't think they're ready. And I was like, what does that mean? What would happen if you didn't do this thing? I was like, well, they'd be really mad. And I was like, keep going, you're almost there, right? And we have to get to this place where like, wait, every time I get angry about this and I step back, am I saying what I wanted to say, right? And then all confidence, zero validation is the demanding side. Other 10-year-olds do this all the time. Your sister can do this. I don't know what the big idea is. By the way, we've all said stuff like this. Don't worry, like I've said stuff like this about my kid. We actually had a great WhatsApp the other day of all the parents at our office being like, struggling to do what I practice what I preach today, right? Because we've all said these things, right? And we're all good parents. So one thing that I always like parents to look at is where would you rate yourself? And you see, I think I included in your worksheets too, like an actual grid. And when we do our group, we do parent-focused work at our clinic. I have parents do this together. Put themselves both on this grid between support and accommodation. How supportive am I in how I speak and address my child? And how accommodating am I to my child? And again, if any of you guys have like 504 plans or anything like that, accommodation means something different in that capacity. So, if we're thinking about low support, low accommodation, that's going to be that demanding parent. High support, high accommodation is going to be that more protective. We want to go to this high support, low accommodation place. And remember, an accommodation, the way we're defining it, it's something that we're doing that we wouldn't be doing if they weren't anxious, and that we don't feel like is developmentally appropriate for our child. So we're not talking about like, cutting up your 2-year-old's grapes, like, I gotta stop doing that. Like, no, it's appropriate for their age, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking specifically about those two things. So why do parents fail to support their kid? Doesn't that sound really scary? None of you are failing to support your kid, don't worry. But these are some of the barriers that I hear from parents the most when we talk about just shifting our language to have both of those components of support. Validation will make my child more anxious, right? That idea of like, if I'm sitting there alongside them being like, this is really hard, then I'm boosting that. If I'm validating, then I should be accommodating. If I tell them that it's hard, then I should do the thing to make it easy again, right? I hear that from parents a lot. Maybe they don't say it in those exact words, but they'll be like, yeah, if she can't do this thing, then why shouldn't I help, right? Her reactions are too exaggerated and senseless to validate. If anyone's ever had their kid melt down about something completely idiotic, most parents have. Usually there's like a tiredness factor. I feel like that plays into that. My daughter's most exaggerated, like one of the most insane tantrums we've ever seen from her, and she's actually doesn't have a ton. She got upset because she realized how Christmas was spelled, and it wasn't how she thought it was spelled in her head, and it was just like, what? She's a perfectionist, so yeah. I'm actually not sure my kid can do it. Parents feel that way a lot in our office. And I'm like, please let your child surprise you. Please, please, please. I said it, but it didn't work. This is my favorite one too. Because then, again, we're maybe solving the wrong problem. So it comes down to what you were asking about, that idea of, when they do have a behavioral episode or they're having a tantrum, right? We say things as if it's a switch, right? And so people want to come to therapy and take an intervention and apply it, A plus B equals calm, obedient child. And it doesn't really work that way, right? So what I tell parents is like, we need to kind of separate from their reaction as being the indicator of whether we're doing the right thing. And that's not for every situation you'll interact with your kid through, but for anxiety it is, because anxiety is a liar. That's the whole definition, right? I'm experiencing this fear response when I'm safe. And then my child doesn't believe me. They don't believe that they can do it. They probably don't, right? That's our job as parents, to scaffold their way through the world, right? So we can be validating and confident, so we're calling it supportive, even in the midst of them having a tantrum, right? And so that's where the parent accommodation piece is so awesome, because you're 100% guaranteeing their success. And here's what I mean by that. My child has zero impact on whether or not, or I guess I should say zero control. She definitely influences. The younger one, less so. She definitely influences it, but she doesn't control whether I accommodate. So if she doesn't feel like she can do something and she needs me, I have control over whether I do that thing or not. And if I don't do it, I get the chance, no matter what, to prove to her that she could get through that moment without that thing, right? Now, doesn't mean that I abandon her, doesn't mean that I'm not supporting her and cheering her on, but I get to guarantee that she gets through that hard moment, right? If she's relying on herself, she may not have that confidence yet, right? And so in individual therapy, we call the gold standard of evidence-based treatment for anxiety disorders is called exposure and response prevention. It's the, if you're afraid of snakes, here's a pit of snakes, hop in, right? And so if I'm working directly with the child to do ERP, I am working on them being the one to face this fear. Now, again, that is a really hard sell for kids, although kids are really good at it, and it's really fun to do with kids, because they're really proud of themselves. But with parents, we get the chance to give them the opportunity to experience all the sciencey reasons that that's effective for treatment without them even having to be on board. Ideally they are, but. Okay, so how can you help? How can we help? So, okay, first of all, I like parents to map your accommodations. So, take stock, and I tell parents, don't panic. You don't have to take all these things away or stop doing all these things or anything like that, but it's good to know, okay, wait, how has this anxiety started to show up in our lives and dictate how we run it? Now, some things that I like to call out that may not be perceived as accommodations. Anybody have a lawyer child that is a really good negotiator? Yeah. I've got one too, and I'm like, man, you're smart. I'm really glad, but also please stop. So, while arguing might not seem like an accommodation, it definitely takes two people to argue, right? So we get to decide, how do I show up in this conversation? What do I want to say? Again, that reassurance seeking is very common with kids. So the safety trick or the compulsion is the reassurance seeking. The accommodation is your decision to answer that. Now you're probably thinking, wow, it seems really cruel for my kid to be like, are you gonna pick me up? You're like, no. One, we don't lie, we don't lie to our kids, but also what we do is we let them know. We go through a process in our clinic of picking specific targets and systematically decreasing them over time. And we let our kids know. And I do this with little kids. I actually started doing this with my own child when she was like, my oldest child when she was like 3, and was trying to learn to sleep in her bed without her passy. And while she wasn't having the really large existential anxieties that older kids have at that point, it's the same idea of like, I love you too much, this is what you can expect from me, right? So there was no ignoring her or anything like that, but she had to know exactly what she could expect to get from me, right? Pick a target and build a plan. Can't remember everything I gave you guys. I think I gave y'all. Yes, I did. A worksheet 2 to outline, okay, what am I gonna do? If I stop doing this thing, and some of you are like, I don't know, they're in my bed from 7 p.m. until 7 a.m. That feels like a lot of steps, and it might be. So encouraging parents to break things down into tiny steps and building a plan. And sometimes I scare parents because I contingency plan really far, like what could possibly go wrong that would keep you from holding this boundary, right? Kid won't let you go to Publix by yourself because of separation anxiety. What happens if they chase after your car? What if you say, okay, I'm gonna go on my own. I know you can handle this, the babysitter's here, yada, 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 and they start chasing you, right? What if they are throwing things? What if they are being mean to their sibling, right? What if we're really late to school, right? We wanna plan for all those things so that parents can systematically reduce some of their accommodations in a way that feels manageable for your family. Because if your family's like mine, accommodation might be like really kind of holding up certain parts of your life, right? And again, parents accommodate for a lot of reasons. We don't just accommodate because our kid is anxious, we also accommodate because we have another child maybe that you wanna make sure they don't miss out on the LA because the other child is having a meltdown, right? Or because you really value their education right now more than they do, and you wanna make sure you're there on time for school. Or because you're exhausted and you wanna go to sleep as fast as possible. All of those are valid reasons, right? So rather than ripping the rug out from under it, we say, okay, how can we take a moment, build a plan, and reduce this over time? And we cope when we build on that response. So the other fun part is that we get to celebrate. When our kid gets through something hard, we always want to be positively reinforcing the tolerance of distress, not good behavior, whatever that means, right? So if I tell my child, like, I am gonna go out to dinner with dad, you are gonna stay with grandma, I know you don't wanna do that, which is accurate for my child. The other one, he doesn't care. He doesn't come up in this talk as much because nothing bothers him. But I can say all of the things to her, and she can stay up crying with grandma and still be awake at 11:30 when I get home, and I get to come in and say, I am so proud of you. You did such a great job, right? So much of this too is about maintaining the ability to stick to your own plan rather than feel like you are beholden to whatever feelings might arise in the moment, which is how a lot of parents of anxious kids describe living life. Like, you're on eggshells, right? That they could lose it at any moment, so let me make sure I keep everything just right. And before you know it, it's like harder and harder and harder to keep everything just right. So yes, reduce accommodations. No, what doesn't help. We use a letter as part of this SPACE program that I talked about to communicate support. And it's really funny, the teenagers roll their eyes a lot, but I do it on purpose with families to make it feel different. Because if your family's like mine, and a lot of the families we work with, there's also been a lot of times where you've probably been like, no more. And then the next night you're like, okay, fine, get in bed. I'm so tired, right? So it helps us to kind of follow through on our intentions. And by reducing accommodations, you can kind of reclaim some of those boundaries that are yours. It's okay to exist. Observe without solving. So this is some of the more, I think, what people think of with child therapy a little bit more. Being able to label feelings, communicate that you support them, and being okay with them not being okay. That is such a gift that you can give your kid when you can let them be dysregulated and upset and be okay with it. And that's not the same as like condoning bad behavior. If they're not okay, it's like throwing things at their sibling or whatever. That's not what I mean. I mean, they don't have to have it all together for you to be there with them, right? And you're not always trying to fix their feelings. And then reinforce that resilience. Like I said, praise and reward when they get through a hard moment. And give yourself gratitude, because there's, like I said before, there's truly nothing worse than seeing your kid in distress, and to allow them the space to struggle through something is very challenging as a parent as well. So you've got to give yourself that support. I like to point parents to that celebration moment, because sometimes we need to see it too, to get to have a vision for why we might let them have a hard time with something. Okay. This is us. We're here if you need us. We have 25 clinicians. I do have a little bit of like sciencey stuff too at the end, but I didn't know if we wanted that or not. But I wanted to pause for a second and see what questions you guys have, or what you wanted to go into more detail on or discuss further. Yeah.
So my son doesn't present anxious behavior as described here, but I know, for some I'm his mother, so probably gonna have anxiety. But I see that he has like some perfectionism tendencies, and then it's almost like paralysis, like analysis by paralysis, and he can't make a decision.
Mhm.
Like, you've got 4 books here to choose from, pick 2. Dead.
Yeah.
The water cannot make a choice, and it drives me crazy because I'm the opposite. My anxiety doesn't look like that. It's like a crippling kind. So I give him time and space
Mhm.
where I can, but other times I'm like, we gotta go.
Yeah.
Like, I can't wait on you anymore, and I don't know how to help push him a little bit without making him shut down.
Yeah. So that's a really common symptom. So if we think about those pieces, when we're really looking for a pattern, when we're looking for anxiety, more than we're looking for one presentation or one symptom. So what you're telling me is like, one trigger is making a decision. his worry, we don't know, we'll let him do that. But the good part is we don't have to know that one to make it better. Usually with choice analysis paralysis type stuff, it's there's a wrong answer and I'm gonna pick it, or regret aversion, right? Order envy. Oh no, that looks so much better. I wish I had done something different, right? That's a big one. Sometimes it's disappointing other people, right? A lot of kids are like, I don't know, mom, what if mom doesn't like that book? And you're like, I swear I don't care what book it is, right? Yeah. And so we have the worry piece, and then we have the compulsion. And so remember, compulsions can be active, overt behaviors, things that we do. It can also be things that we don't do, things that we avoid. So he's delaying, avoiding a decision, right? To try to cope with that feeling. And so sometimes what I see with kids like that, and this may not be the case in your home, to be very clear, but I'll see parents reduce opportunities for them to have a choice, right? They'll be like, I'll pick for you, right? Or the opposite, they're like, I guess we don't have a pick, right? And so trying to figure out, okay, there's no wrong answer in terms of this is a bad choice, this is a good choice. It's more about how do I understand the parts of his anxiety and what he's trying to accomplish, and how do I help him face that, right? And so this comes up a lot with social phobia, right? People think, okay, I'm afraid to speak in public, and so I'm gonna practice speaking in public, that's my exposure. And that may be true, but if the person's really afraid of being embarrassed, then over-rehearsing a speech again and again and again might not actually help them learn to cope with the idea that this might be the day I fall off the stage, right? And so for him, wondering, okay, what's he really trying to avoid, and how can I help him learn he can face that, could help you reacclimate him to that idea. Does he avoid decisions around big stuff and little stuff alike?
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, but it probably is the wrong answer, or like a regret. Because it's something as simple as like, I never let them get treats. I mean, we mom, we don't get extra stuff ever. And I was feeling so generous one day, we're at Publix, I'm like, we each pick a piece of candy in the checkout area. My daughter picks up M&Ms, he won't make a decision. I'm like, well, checkout's over, we're leaving. And then a complete meltdown because he didn't pick anything. I was like, you just throw the Sour Patch Kids on there, I could care less.
Yeah.
And that's an example, and I never thought about why he couldn't just throw a piece of candy on the conveyor belt. Also, never do that choice again, because now I'm suffering.
No good deed, right?
Ever goes on
Yeah,
trash.
yes.
And so he never thought back to, until you just mentioned it, but it's almost like a regret of like, if you pick the wrong candy, it's candy.
This is
No
my
longer
chance. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's in those types of situations too, where you're like, okay, I have a kid that's like, again, really, what we call high functioning. They're not impaired. There's no major areas of their life that they're not attending to or anything like that. That's where too that support language is really helpful. Like having almost a script in your head to be like, hey, you're feeling really stuck right now, and I can see that you're having a really hard time. I know you can make this decision, right? And again, the accommodation can look very different, and it could be opposite. In one family, they may be accommodating by rushing the choice, and another, they may be accommodating by giving like tons of time for the choice. I recently had a family that was having a lot of this same issue. She was becoming very upset about making choices, and to the point where like older siblings were like, does she have to come on vacation? Because it's gonna be really annoying, it takes her forever. And so that was one of the things that we implemented. It was like, we're gonna have a 2-minute decision on things, and if at the end of 2 minutes, everyone walks out, right? And so we practiced. They gave her like $5 to go to Target, and when we go to the dollar section at Target, which your kids are always probably dragging you to, because it's right by the entrance, and it was like, you have 2 minutes, right? Or we walk out. And so we're learning to practice that feeling of like, and like, we did it 3 times, and one time she was like, no, it was awesome, thank you. And then the other 2 times she was like, I wish I'd chosen something else. But we were able to be like, okay, how do we cope with this feeling? How can we handle it, right? And how do we just move forward? And so in the therapy world, we call that inhibitory learning. That's the idea that we give our brain new information to process that fear for next time, right? And that's what exposure is all about. So accommodation reduction becomes about the same thing. How do I help my kid learn to experience things in a new way? And exposures, I've had parents ask me this a lot, like, so you're gonna make sure everything goes okay, right? I'm like, no, absolutely not. Because I don't know if it's gonna go okay. I'm not gonna put your kid in danger. I promise them that. I will never put you in danger. And I tell kids I will never force you to do anything because I can't force you to do anything. But I will absolutely leave it uncertain. And many years ago, when I first started doing exposure therapy at a clinic in Marietta, I was working with a kid who had very severe separation anxiety, like needed mom on the couch next to her at the beginning of sessions. We had worked our way up to like, mom could like sit outside the door and would like literally sit on the floor outside my office while she did her session with me. And we had gotten to the very first time, after working together for probably 4 or 5 months, where our goal was that mom was gonna leave the clinic during her session and come back at the end. It's the very first time. And we got out and mom wasn't there. And I don't have my cell phone on me, it's on whatever. And so I was like, oh, I'm sure it's fine. And I like take her back into my office. And I was like, hold on 1 second. And I went and I like checked, I had like 5 voicemails that mom had gotten pulled over. Mom was like, I'm gonna go to Starbucks, and she got pulled over. So, it's also a chance to say, okay, well, what didn't go the way we thought? And was it still okay, right? We don't have to control every variable to cope through it, right? So, yeah.
So how do I know, our 8-year-old, almost 9-year-old, coming next week, is very anxious, about certain things, but also has ADHD, and sometimes it's hard to know, and he's an almost 9-year-old boy, so sometimes it's hard to know, where does the line cross between, so in the mornings, we have, his clothes are laid out, ready to go, we do that with everybody, for school, but he would literally not get dressed ever if you didn't make him do it. There are mornings I'm putting the shirt over his head because he just doesn't even think about it. And I don't know that it's conscious. I think it's part of it is that ADHD piece of everything in the world distracts him and he's focused on everything except the pile of clothes.
Yeah.
But how do you know where it crosses the line from one to the other to just being an 8-year-old boy that doesn't really care if he wears his pajamas to school?
Yeah. So there is a major chicken or the egg issue with ADHD in particular. And the short answer to that question too is you have to think about what is the intention behind the action. So a good example of this is kids who stall in the mornings before school, who are really anxious, are often not wanting to necessarily be late to school. And there are other kids that are cool, free morning, right? And so being able to look at that motivation too. And so what I'll often ask parents is okay, what is the thing that we're up against getting them to school? Who's more motivated to make that happen? If it's mom, it's great, just keep the accommodations there because he's not motivated, right? But there may be other ways that he is motivated. And with the ADHD piece, this is where capital A accommodation comes in too. If you guys do have 504 plans or IEPs or anything like that, it's neurodivergence often needs scaffolding to help bridge the gap. But in an ideal world, that scaffolding is sort of self-perpetuating, right? So, with ADHD, we talk about visual lists or breaking things down to fewer steps because it may be that he's struggling with some of those, the executive functioning aspect of the morning, right? There's a lot of steps that go into, I'm in my bed, asleep, I'm fully dressed and ready for school, and I'm out the door, right? That's so many steps. Same with bedtime. So that's why ADHD kids struggle a lot with those things. Now, if he's anxiously avoiding it, right, being able to help him even tackle one task on his own, but look for what his motivation is. Because if he couldn't care less, then I'm not naive enough to think any parent in the world is going to be I guess I'll just let them stay home forever, right? So, so that's where I would say, okay, not a great place to start from an accommodation reduction, but there may be tools that you could give him to help him bridge that gap and take on more of that responsibility in the morning. And when you're talking about motivation, nobody works for free. So that's when we get also, if we are talking about, okay, I'm trying to change my kid's behavior and versus changing my parent behavior, and they have no motivation to change, and they really think they should just sleep in my bed forever, right? Then you may want to look at a behavioral type plan and building a functional behavioral modification plan. And a lot of times those go awry because parents are like, I don't know, I ordered a bunch of pom-poms on Amazon. I'm trying to do it right. And it's not that that's bad, and no hate on the pom-poms, but it's inconsistent, it's not clear, it's hard for parents to police, it ends up putting more work on parents. But you may be able to figure out, okay, what's one thing I want them to own, and I find a very clear way to say, this is what you earn, this is what you do, versus like, every good deed gets a pom-pom, and they're like, well then I'm just gonna stick to these good deeds that are really fun, and ignore my morning routine, right? So where anxiety and ADHD can kind of interact with each other too, is that ADHD is gonna certainly make it difficult to focus, and it's gonna also bring up a bunch of hyper-focus, right? So then you add to anxiety is a naturally avoidant disorder. Someone with ADHD who's also a little bit anxious is like, I'm never gonna look in that direction ever again, right? And so finding ways to make sure it's in front of him can be really helpful too.
Because if he wants, like, this week he's on our right, we went to Firm Bank on Monday, and it was like, okay, get your clothes on to go to Firm Bank, and he was like, dressed like that, right? But like, that's very different than get your clothes on to go to school, like, and so it's just, he just like doesn't care. He enjoy school, he likes school, once he's out the door, he's fine, but it's just like,
Yeah,
you know, that's not fun.
Age appropriate too.
Okay, well, that's.
totally. But I do think what you're describing sounds a lot like executive functioning, right?
Definitely.
And figuring out, okay, how can I break down
Just
this skill into a lot of smaller skills?
manageable steps.
Yeah, much more manageable steps. Yeah.
Thankfully, my youngest child is in college now, so this is a bit of distant history for me, but I still have PTSD from the nuclear tantrum meltdown on the floor where we're absolutely rigid, screaming, little head banging. I'd be happy for small fee to get down on the ground and demonstrate, but what do you recommend sort of generically helping a child navigate through that sort of level of, you know, being off the deep end, and also for the parents in terms of a cocktail to get through that?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned before, once you're there, you kind of just gotta like let it happen a little bit. And a lot of times intervention can prolong it, right? So, one thing that I always ask parents to do is like start tracking. If you're going through that frequently, if you're going through tantrums that are daily, even a couple times a week, tracking a little bit for patterns, right? What kind of patterns can you look for in terms of what we call vulnerabilities? So vulnerabilities are going to be things that have nothing to do with the thing that upset them, that Christmas was not spelled the way they wanted it to be spelled, but might have contributed. Being tired, being hungry, having a test that day, you know, 3 times you tried to go pick out their favorite ice cream and it was sold out of all 3 stores. Like, that's taxing, right? Whatever that thing is, they were experiencing that, you know, having to use all those emotion regulation skills in that moment, and they've drained them, right? So you can start to predict too, okay, where do I need to step in earlier and give them some ability to process wow, this has been a really hard day, right? Before they get to that place. Now that's very hard with like a 2 or 3-year-old, right? And you do come to that place of, it is absolutely developmentally appropriate for your preschooler to be having those moments. And we wish it wouldn't be, except for everyone, including myself, has Googled, like, is my child a sociopath? Like, I don't know, question marks? Because you see those moments where you're like, oh my gosh, something is really wrong. And a lot of times it's not. But when you're in that moment, what I always tell parents is like, okay, you have this space in the beginning where you could intervene. And that doesn't mean like, try to just like keep everything perfect so they don't. And then you have this space at the end where you can also say, okay, how do I make sure this is useful, right? And so one tool is to tell the story from the beginning to end. And I tell parents, you have to practice being neutral. It's really hard to not say like, yeah, and then you're being really ridiculous because it's not that big of a deal, right? Even though they were, and it's not. But being able to say, okay, we were sitting at the table, and mom said, yes, you could have a cookie after dinner, and then we went to the pantry, and it turns out there weren't any cookies, and you said, go to the store and get cookies, and I said I can't, and then you did this, and then you were on the floor, and then this, and then you calmed down, and then you took some deep breaths, and now you're feeling a little bit better now, right? So you tell the story from the beginning all the way to the end. It really helps them make sense of everything that just happened and kind of reconcile that whole process. But the best thing is to kind of step back a little bit when you can and just give them space to be upset. The more you're kind of engaging, like get off the floor, stop that, what have you, you're likely prolonging it because you're giving them something to push up against, right? So one of the documents you guys have too is 25 tips for parenting an anxious child. And one of the things on there too is anxious kids love conflict because conflict always ends, right? And so that's something to remember with the tantrum too, is it gives them this moment, this like burst that can have a conclusion during a lot of problems that don't have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the more you can give them that, it's useful for them, but you want to let's find another way to do it next time, please, right? And so when you have that pattern a little bit kind of tracked over time, you can also see if, okay, are things getting better, right? A child that goes from having a tantrum that's 45 minutes every day, who then goes to having a tantrum every day that's 20 minutes, okay, they're actually quick, they're learning how to regulate a little bit faster, but on the outside, it still feels like your kid's having a tantrum every day, right? So I like parents to start taking that information so you can also have a little bit of data to decide, okay, is this improving? Because if not, it just feels like another tantrum. Yeah.
You mentioned like kind of being neutral, like when they're in that. I feel like there's like such mixed reviews on that. Like if you ignore them, they're gonna feel unloved and like, which is I think ridiculous. But is that okay to like let them have their moment and then like circle back and be like, all right, like what is the best way to handle them in that like ridiculous state that they're in?
So that's a really good question. And what I always tell people about any sort of parenting theory, like overarching parenting theory, Dr. Spock or gentle parenting or whatever, is it is really, really, really difficult to apply good research principles to things like that because it's so difficult to isolate the variables, right? So what's more useful most of the time is to say, okay, how do I take the stuff that we do know to be true and apply it to this situation, right? And so what we know is that generally speaking, kids who are loved, fed, sheltered are highly resilient, right? If you have a good relationship with your kid, it is extremely unlikely that you walking away while they're screaming and kicking on the floor is going to like ruin that, right? We also know that the more attention we give a behavior, the more likely it is to persist, right? And we also know behavior economics. We have positive reinforcement and we have negative reinforcement, right? And we have punishment, right? So certainly you could come in and punish. It's not that I don't think there's space for consequences and punishments or anything like that. It's just that, like, from a research perspective, it tends to be less productive in changing the behavior next
I
time.
don't think it works, especially in that
Yeah.
moment.
And so what that often looks like is like, okay, if I just ask parents to like map out all the reinforcers, right? Okay, is my attention a reinforcer? And it might not be the way you think, right? If you had to be like fighting, we're like, how could that be a reinforcer? We're both miserable. But they've got you there in it with them. And it may be a form of connection, right? So, but whenever there's a moment where you step away, and sometimes like with kids my age, they're 5 and 3. What I do is I just stay, but I don't interact. Or I'll go like sit on their bed with them versus like leaving them alone. That just feels better to me. I don't feel like that's the right answer clinically, right? Other parents are like, if I'm in that room, I'm going to lose it. Yeah. Get out, like go.
Right.
So it's totally okay either way. I think what you really want to do is like in this situation, what are my reinforcers? Like, okay, removing that whatever thing we were about to do, did I say, fine, we're not going on the picnic? It's like, well, he didn't want to go to the picnic to begin damn it, that's why you're having this tantrum, right? And so recognizing those tools, I think, is way more useful than being like, am I a good parent in this moment that's supportive? I always though recommend coming back after the fact to be like, hey, how are you? Like, let's just check back in. That got a little heated, you know?
Thank you.
How, in a moment where they're in that moment, but maybe you were talking about earlier about behavior, like maybe they're fighting with sibling, or maybe they're like throwing, maybe there's something like more, how do you suggest like shutting down the behavior that could be like dangerous or out, without like reinforcing, like where do you draw that line?
So consequences from a purely, animalistic research perspective, consequences make the most sense when they're related to the behavior, right? So, and similarly, rewards can make things worse when they counteract the behavior, which is why you should never be like, if I lose 5 pounds, I'm going out to get cheesecake, because it like confuses your brain about what the goal is, right? And so with the, hold on, I lost my train of thought. Get back to me. Wait, what was it? Go back.
So how do you stop the behavior when it's like,
Consequences make.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. The consequences that make the most sense. So if they're, throwing things at sister, mine come home with toys, and mine are coming home with these like bouncy balls. I'm like, why? Why do teachers do this, right? And so the bouncy balls are going constantly at each other, right? And so a natural consequence is like, we can't play with that inside anymore. Like, I wish we could play with this, but we're having a lot of trouble making this choice, like, these go away, right? So that's more where I would intervene with the actual task that you're trying to change, versus being like, all right, no more screen time for a week, right? Especially with younger ones, they're like, those things don't correlate to me at all, but it can be really, really tough to help them connect their behavior to the consequence if they're not related. So that's where I would usually step in with those types of things. Or if it's like sibling related, pushing them to either, like, again, you have to kind of look at the motivators in situations. Like, some kids, like, please separate us. And then other kids, it may be like, all right, guys, you're both gonna have to watch each other's thing for a little bit because we're having trouble figuring out something together, or whatever that, or we're both gonna lose TV, right? Whatever that motivator can be. Make sense? Yeah.
So I have a 9-year-old that has a lot of separation anxiety, wants to know when I'm coming home, exactly when I'm coming home. I frequently miss that target, or just go out and just say, you're gonna have tears and stay with grandma. But I guess, is there any for that age, like a recommended accommodation, or just, I basically said, like, you can handle this, and we're going, and I'll talk to you later. We really don't talk to them when we're gone that way. Maybe tuck them in, have a 2-minute call, but really don't baby the situation.
So that's where a lot of times, yes, so you hit some of the major accommodations we see in those moments: excessive calling, texting, check-ins, and being able to set those limits. One thing that you may want to do is like deliver really upfront, here's exactly what you can expect from me, right? Or even set some challenges for her that we're gonna do together, right? And maybe you do put a reward on it, right? But like, hey, every day this week, I'm gonna leave and go run some errands by myself. Like, usually I tell kids like what they can expect from you that might be supportive. Like, there will always be an adult in charge, right? The adult can call me if there's an emergency, whatever that thing is. I'm gonna go out and run an errand. I know you can handle not knowing. We're gonna practice not knowing because I know you can handle it, right? And give her a little bit more of the uncertainty part, because again, you might be really wanting to expose her more to the not having the answers, even more than the separation. So sometimes we see that same behavior with kids who aren't worried necessarily about the separation as much as like needing to have all the details.
Let's know exactly what time I'm coming back.
Yeah.
So I like add an hour usually.
Yeah.
Because
So
at least I'll meet the target.
well, and so what I'll tell parents is like, you can also do something fun too, of like, you're gonna go, we're gonna do something fun this week, but you're not gonna know what it is, right? You're not gonna know when it is, right? How can we learn to tolerate a little bit of that more and kind of get to be on that celebrating, reinforcing side more with something that's exciting for for them too. So you can kind of manufacture things that way. I mean, that's what we would do in exposure therapy, is like manufacture ways to face this fear on purpose. And you know, the difference is that in exposure therapy, we're starting with a lot of psychoeducation. They know what we're doing, they know why we're doing it, they know we're doing a worry challenge and so forth. But in your own homes, you can do that too, of like stating what the problem is. It's hard for you every time I go, and every time I go, I get all these questions, and I don't think they're making you feel any better, right? They're just making you feel like you can't handle it, and I think you can handle it a lot. So here's what's gonna happen tonight, right? Here's where I'm gonna go. And now if we're talking about like a trip, or you're gone for the weekend.
I'm lucky to get away for a night.
I have actually had situations where I've been like, it is clinically indicated for mom to go stay at a hotel for 3 nights so that we can practice implementing this stuff at home. And the mom's like, say no more, that's fine. Because yeah, it is hard to get away, right? But certainly the other thing to think about too is like, when you're gonna do check-ins or calls or answer questions, how can you decouple that from a feeling, right? So same thing is true for, like, the bane of my existence right now is like my middle school and high schoolers who are taking mental health days. Like, stop. So what I tell the parents is like, their stress, you're right, they're put under way too much, and they totally deserve a mental health day. It should not be decided at 8 a.m. when they're like, I'm panicking and I don't want to go to school, right? So you schedule it ahead of time and say like, hey look, I have 4 tests coming up this week, it's been exhausting. On Friday, can you pick me up early and we go shopping? Okay, cool, whatever. Same thing is true for all the questions and all that. It's like, when am I gonna call you? And why? Like, how many times, right? You might say like, I'll totally check in with you before bedtime, right? You can expect that from me, but you already know what that's gonna happen. So if at 5 o'clock, 2.5 hours before your bedtime, you start panicking, you're like, I need to talk to mom, I'm not gonna be available at that point, right? Because I'm not responding to the anxiety. And if you guys don't have a language in your home to be talking about this stuff too, establishing one can be really helpful. You know, with little kids, a lot of times we name the anxiety, we draw it, whatever, they have like their worry monster, their worry bully. The older kids, even starting at like 8, 9, 10, anything that they can do to externalize it can be really helpful, because then the conversation and the language doesn't become like, I'm not giving you this, it's like, I'm not giving your anxiety this. I would do anything for you, and that also means that I'm not gonna feed this thing that's making life harder for you, right? And so them understanding that process, whether they like it or not, again, going back to the study, they all understood, they all agreed it wasn't helping, but none of them were strong enough to kind of separate from it. That can really help you too, to kind of let her know what it is exactly that you're doing and why. Yeah. Yeah. Great.
How do you handle a situation when you know what the trigger is, you know what but it's not something that can be changed? Like, for our son's he's afraid of dogs, but he's not really afraid of dogs. He doesn't like when dogs bark because it startles him, so it's a loud noise. We've got neighbors' dogs and other dogs that like, he's not prepared for it, and then they bark or they go, and then it just like startles him, and it's like a sensory thing. So it's not the dog, it's the sound and the unknown of the sound. There's something I can do about that. Dogs bark. Like, so when you have a trigger that you can't change, and the child just has to learn to handle, like how do you deal with something like that?
Do you have a dog?
No.
Okay.
We're not getting one.
Absolutely not.
But my mom had a dog until a year and a half ago, and he loved her, but she was old, she didn't really bark that much, and you know, it was like.
Yeah. Well, and you know, it's funny. That's part of why I also include parents in kid sessions, is as much to keep the kid honest, to keep the whole thing honest, as it is so that kids don't leave and they're like, my therapist said I need a emotional support dog. I've had that so many times where the mom's like, I don't think she said that, but nevertheless, you're right. I mean, you're hitting at one of the most important questions that we have to ask early on in treatment is, what is the core fear? And what you're saying is like, the core fear is not the dog. It's the uncertainty of when this annoying sound will occur. So what you're describing is very similar to what we see a lot with kids who are really afraid of the fire alarm going off or having an active shooter drill. We don't know when it could be, and that uncertainty is really intolerable, right? And so what you want to kind of boost to sound, if he knew it was coming, if it was like, all right, we're gonna press the button, the sound's gonna come on, doesn't sound like he'd be triggered by that. It's the like, at any moment it could occur.
It's the fight or flight, like, adrenaline rush that I think hits when, he fell off his bike when we were riding because he avoided the dog on a leash, because the dog might bark, and he went off the trail and fell off his bike. Like, we're talking like,
Yeah.
but not the dog, the barking, the potential for barking.
Are there whole spaces that your family avoids because of this fear?
No.
It's just like if he encounters one, like you said, it's like walking down the street and he like goes around. So what you can potentially do is like, if you guys go ride your bikes a lot or go for walks a lot, like, all right, every dog you see, we're gonna practice walking straight by it. And every time you walk by a dog, you and I are gonna high five. And if the dog barks, the dog barks. We're gonna see what happens, right? And just let him practice renegotiating how he approaches that fear. That's how we handle it in treatment, right? If it's not impairing him, it's not keeping him from other parts of his life, then it's also okay to be like, yeah, you really think that's that, you know? But if it does start to impair his functioning, and that's what we see a lot with, you know, bees is a really good example, because I was like, who likes bees or vomit, right? But the question is, could it come up at any moment? Yes. And do I wanna, you know, we see kids who are like, I'm not going to the park, I'm not playing outside, I don't wanna be near flowers, I don't wanna be, I once had a bee phobia patient who didn't wanna eat any sugar outside because a bee could come, right? And so it's about that question mark. And so that's the part that you want him to learn more about. So maybe even like finding more time to play outside. Or doing play dates at friends' houses that have dogs, or inviting over dogs, or like letting the neighbor's dog run around your backyard, right? There could be other ways to approach that too. You can come to my house, my neighbor's dog barks all the time. I say my dog, my dog never shuts up. So come on over. And to be fair, it is very triggering for me as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, it's like, as adults, we just started to with it. I don't like when a dog barks at me either.
I'm like, please stop. Yeah. Anything else?
Have you seen, like kids have anxiety around academic expectations? So my daughter is 6, she's in 1st grade, and the teacher told me at the beginning of the year that she was noticing anxiety in her. And I'm sort of like, y'all are like a beat away from asking her to memorize her multiplication tables, you know?
Yeah.
Have you experienced that, that it just feels like
Yes.
a non-stop
Yeah.
demand on like
Yes. And a lot of that,
kids?
so we see a lot of perfectionism and a lot of the school anxiety is evaluation based or time based, like I see a lot of kids, there's one school in Dunwoody that we see a ton of kids from, and they have this thing called Mad Minutes, and it's like, I've heard more about Mad Minutes in my, like, career, it's just like, it's like times tables, but they do it K through 5, but it's like, here it's just like recognizing numbers, and then it's addition, and then it's, anyway, they all talk about it, I've seen it generationally, right? Because there's time associated with it, and there's evaluation associated with it, right? So yes, we see a lot of that, and especially with those early grades, pre-K, K, 1, 2, a lot of times they are being sort of asked to do a lot of developmentally inappropriate levels of sitting, focusing, attending to stuff, and there's so much pressure to not get behind, they feel that. For any of you guys that have your kids in public school and have 3rd grade or above, these teachers, and I have tremendous respect for teachers, they are lying through their teeth about these milestones. Like the amount of kids that are like, I won't get to go forward if I don't, like, you don't even get your scores until you're already in the next grade. Like, they're not gonna hold you back, right? But they're hearing that message over and over and over again. Yeah, yeah, and it is hard. Like we see a lot of high schoolers too who are like, I have a 4.0, I'm the president of this, and I'm the captain of the volleyball team, and I'm probably not getting into Georgia, right? And they might be right? So like it is really competitive, and so being able to help figure out, okay, what's the point of diminishing returns of their attention, their studying, etc., and how do I get them okay with failing, right?
How do you suggest like parents advocate for their child without becoming like a problem parent? You know, like I feel like that's kind of a tough line.
Really tough. And depending on the school, that's also a big question mark, right?
Yeah.
Like what kind of administration are you dealing with? How collaborative is the teacher? How much bandwidth does the teacher have, right? Realistically speaking, these teachers are really strapped right now, and it's really attention, even if they want to. So one of the best points of advocacy is like you figuring out what your own expectations are at home, right? And a lot of parents, understandably, and we say this to my kids too, there's nothing wrong with saying this, but you do want to operationalize it, is the idea of like, I just want you to do your best. What does that mean, right? And so the more you can help her understand, like, what's a tangible goal here, and then the rest is okay. Like, what happens if I make a mistake? That's fine. What happens if I embarrass myself? That's fine. Like, how can she learn to cope with those things? And that can really help. And one thing that really helps with that with the younger kids too, especially when maybe anxiety hasn't totally developed, but it's emerging, is like, how do you model doing those things in a way that feels really healthy? Modeling is a huge part of this look to the caregiver process of anxiety. Is mom concerned, right? Is dad concerned? And so if I mess up or something feels scary or I get that fight or flight triggered, that's why that extra step is there, is to see like, is mom concerned? If mom's not, a lot of times they kind of can move forward, right? It's why some kids really, really struggle like at a soccer game when mom and dad are in the stands, but they might not struggle the same way at practice or if mom and dad didn't come that day. And sometimes I've had parents like crying in my office where like, I feel like everyone else gets their best. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong, right? And the truth is you're not doing anything wrong, but they are looking to you to see, okay, what do I need to do? And so the more you can practice modeling, like, I made a mistake, right? I worked really hard, but it still didn't go the way I wanted to, right? You can really help them have a concept of what that can look like, and then you can operationalize for her what I expect from you academically. I expect you to do your homework. I expect you to, whatever, you're at first grade, like, what do they have? Like, review your vocab words, read with me for 10 minutes a night, like, whatever that thing is. And like, beyond that, we just see what happens, right?
So it's the same concept as like a toddler when they fall over and the parent who runs over there and like picks them up versus the one who's like, okay, brush it off and doesn't, or just ignores it. Like, the kid learns to stand up, be resilient, keep going. So they look to the parent first for
Exactly.
their
Am I
reaction.
okay?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. It's why also some of you might have a different pattern with one parent than the other. It doesn't mean that one parent's doing it right and the other parent's doing it wrong. It's just like a different pattern. Like, so much of our behavior is pattern. And so a different one develops in a different scenario because of different inputs. Well, I know it's 8 o'clock and a lot of you probably want to get home to hopefully quiet houses and kids asleep. But I'm going to stick around for a few minutes if anyone wants to ask questions or anything like that. So, yeah.
Thank you so
Thank you guys.